remove my jacket. I see one or two people already have. Sure. Dr. Taylor, are you travelling cabriolet these days? Not today. Huh? Oh, goodness me. At least you got a pension. So welcome to the this afternoon's meeting. I will remind members that this meeting is actually being recorded. It is a public meeting. It is recorded, so the usual things apply. If you don't want, hide your face or something, or have your name removed or whatever. Can we confirm the minutes of the last meeting that we had in our calling papers? Meeting that was held on the 31st of March. Everybody happy with those? Thank you. Okay, thank you. Right, Mrs. Fox, do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chairman, we've got apologies from Councillors D. Holmes, M. Boyle and Parish Councillor M. Roberts.
Can we add Councillor Reid to that, please? He did say to me a couple of weeks ago he was off in Brittany and he would not be back until the 26th of June. So could I apologise for any meetings that he couldn't attend? Right. Are there any declarations of interest? No. Then we'll move into item 4 on the agenda, and I'll ask Mrs. Fowkes to talk about the proposed arrangements for dealing with the Code of Conduct complaints. Thank you, Mrs. Fowkes.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, members. As members will recall, at your meeting on the 31st of March, you agreed to a revision to the Code of Conduct that was agreed by full council then on the 10th of May and is now the council's adopted Code of Conduct. At that meeting at the end of March, members also agreed that I should look at and review the arrangements for dealing with Code of Conduct complaints that I've done in consultation with the chairman, and they are appended to your report. They were compared against the revised guidance issued by the Local Government Association, and I'm pleased to report that no significant changes were required to the majority of those arrangements, which were found to be absolutely in accordance with the revised guidance. The LGA guidance makes it clear that whilst the practices and and arrangements for dealing with Code of Conduct complaints can differ between authorities, the principles of fairness, proportionality, transparency and impartiality should apply to all such arrangements. The main change being proposed and before members this afternoon is in relation to the appealing of the initial assessment decision. As members may be aware, when a Code of Conduct complaint comes in, it comes into currently myself as monitoring officer. And the monitoring officer undertakes an initial assessment to see whether, on the face of it, there's a prima facie case that if the matter was proven, there would be a breach of the Code of Conduct. Absolutely to emphasise, I'm not making an assessment whether there has or hasn't been a breach, just if it was made out whether there would be a breach. Our current arrangements allow for that initial assessment decision to be appealed and go to a review subcommittee. The LGA guidance and indeed practice in the vast majority of other authorities does not provide for an appeal of that initial assessment decision. And therefore it's proposed in the revised arrangements before you this afternoon, members, is that appeal process is removed from our arrangements going forward. As monitoring officer, I'm hopefully appropriately trained and qualified to undertake that initial assessment, and there is a suitable check and balance on that with me making that assessment. That assessment has to be agreed by the council's independent person. For this authority, that's a gentleman called Stephen Cork, who's an ex-local government officer and experienced in such matters. So any decision I make on dismissing or upholding a complaint at that initial assessment stage is subject to that balance of a check by that independent person. So we're proposing that the review subcommittee would be renamed as the assessment subcommittee, and that subcommittee would meet to deal with any complaints where I, as monitoring officer, felt that it would not be appropriate for me to undertake that initial assessment. So for as an example, if I had perhaps a month ago given a member a piece of advice in relation to a standards issue, and then a complaint came in against that member in relation to that same matter, clearly it would not be appropriate for me to then make that initial assessment on whether the member had potentially breached the code of conduct. So in those kind of circumstances where I've had a prior involvement, at that stage I would be saying that comes to the assessment subcommittee, and the assessment subcommittee undertake that initial assessment. Similarly, if the complaint was against a particularly high-profile member or involved a particularly sensitive issue, or that I felt was not appropriate for me as monitoring officer to deal with, then again that would come before that assessment subcommittee. So it would be a member decision on whether that passed that initial test and went forward either for informal resolution or investigation. The other change being proposed this afternoon, members, is really just a clarification within the arrangements to make it clear that the option of informal resolution is available throughout the process. That has always been the case, that's not a change, and our current arrangements do say that informal resolution is an option available. However, the revised arrangements before you this afternoon just clarify that that is then available throughout the process. So as an example, members, at the initial assessment stage, if I make the determination that there is potentially a breach of the code of conduct, but it could be resolved by informal resolution, I will go down that route and try to implement that informal resolution without the need to go for an investigation. However, if it goes forward for investigation and partway through the investigation, all parties are reminded that informal resolution is actually the appropriate resolution available, then it can kind of change track and go to an informal resolution at that point as well. That has always been the case, but the new arrangements just clarify that and set it out absolutely clearly. So just very briefly, members, moving on to Appendix 1 and the revised arrangements. Just to say at 2.1 of the arrangements, which is on page 7 of your pack, members, it just makes it clear that obviously if someone wishing to make a complaint wishes to do so, we normally ask that they complete the Code of Conduct complaint form. Obviously, if they have a disability and completion of that form is therefore difficult for them for whatever reason, then it's just making clear that we can assist members of the public or indeed members with completing the form or making a complaint in another format, just to make sure we obviously comply with our duties under the equalities legislation. As I say, there are very few changes in the proposed revised arrangements. Just at 4.1 is just clarifying that there is no longer a right of appeal or review of that initial assessment decision. And again at 5.2, just making it clear that informal resolution is available without the need to go for investigation. As members will be aware, if I receive a code of conduct complaint and that indicates that there is some criminal conduct, then that can and should be referred to the police or another appropriate regulatory authority. So I only have a remit to deal with breaches of the code of conduct, and if a complaint is made that flags something else up, then I would refer it on. At point 7 of the arrangements, page 10 onto page 11 of your papers, members, it's just reiterating the point that normally we would keep all code of conduct complaints confidential whilst they're going through the assessment process and indeed through investigation. And the reasoning behind that, members, is that obviously if somebody is in receipt of a complaint against them and it's found that that complaint is unfounded, then having that made public before that determination has been made can in fact be a stain on their name, if you like. So it's appropriate that it's kept confidential up until the point where a breach has been found. And at that point, obviously the findings of the committee would be made available to the public once a breach had been found. So again, the arrangements just make that clear. And they were the only points I wanted to specifically draw to members' attention. But Chairman, obviously happy to take any questions in respect to the arrangements.
Thank you, Mrs. Foulkes. I think what Mrs. Foulkes said there about the informal resolution is something that we have been trying to encourage, actually, with the previous monitoring officer, Mr. Pattison. We tried to do this because there is an inordinate amount of time taken up by officers to investigate some of these complaints, when some of them can be quite trivial, you know, without giving any secrets away. A recent one that we had at a review committee was a complaint by a parish councillor about another parish councillor who had been to account following an election that the complainant wasn't actually at, and it was their election, and reported back to the councillor what the result was. So the councillor complained and said this was a breach of privacy. Well, you know, a lot of Mrs. Foulkes' time was taken up with that complaint, when it could have been dealt with informally, and you know, resolution achieved with a minimum amount of input. So, are there any questions at all, or any comments from members of the committee? Councillor Mrs. Hingley.
Thank you, Chairman. Just on the front page of the Code of Conduct, it says the complaint must be made in writing by post or email. Is that acceptable by email?
Through you, Chairman, yes, it is. What the rules say is it has to be in writing, and that's why we have a standard form. So we make sure we capture all the necessary information, and we capture the complainant's views on confidentiality, etc. So it has to be in writing, but it can be emailed in to me. So that the form is available on the council's website. So somebody could download that form at home and then email it to me if they didn't want to physically send it in the post.
So they have a form?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Dr. Taylor? Yep.
Something like that. Oh, right. How, if there are a number of people who want to make a complaint about a councillor, do they need to make separate ones, or can it be a combined complaint with everybody's signature at the bottom?
It could be. Yeah. It could be either, as long as I get a complaint and it's clear who the complainant is and who the person being complained about is, then that's fine. I wouldn't reject it because it was by more than one person. The alternative is I could potentially have 6 pieces of paper all saying exactly the same thing, so that's absolutely fine.
And have your committees changed? We were on various assessment and follow-up. Now, you changed the names of the committees or the various assessment, the penal committees, and that sort of thing. Are the same people on the same ones?
Yes, subject to members' decision today on whether you agree the revised arrangements, we would then transact that by changing the name of the committee in the council's constitution. But yes, the membership would remain the same and remains the same from last year.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Kinsey.
Thank you, Chairman. Just taking up off your last comments, actually, about informal resolution and the amount of officers' time that's taken up in some of these matters. I'm not aware. Do we actually publicise this to some of those that are making complaints or seeking to pursue complaints, or just the amount of officers' time that are taken up with some of these things? Not going into details, but just in sort of round figures. Thank you, Chairman.
I don't think we do at the moment, but perhaps Mrs. Foulkes would confirm or deny that.
We don't tell them how much it costs because obviously it's difficult to say because obviously it's taking up my time. The counter argument is I'm paid to be the monitoring officer and therefore that's what I'm paid to do. However, if we go to an external investigator, so we have, if it goes to investigation, I think we've quoted before at this committee that generally speaking, going through an external investigation will cost something in the region of £5,000 per investigation, and that's not including any of my time or anybody else's, that's purely for that external investigator. So there is a significant cost involved in such investigations, and even the initial assessment stages that the chairman alluded to takes a very considerable amount of time. Now, if I costed that at my charge out rate for being a solicitor, you know, you'd be talking several £100s for each assessment. So.
Any other questions or comments?
I'm sorry, just one more. If it comes into you and you deal with it on an informal basis, does it go as a recorded complaint but done as an initial stage, or is it, if you like, thrown out because it has never got that far in the assessment to go onto your figures?
Now, it would be counted as a complaint, and if it goes through informal resolution, it would be reported to this committee. So, we, as members will know, we don't report the details of the complaint, but we report that we had a complaint and it was resolved by informal resolution.
Any others? I've just got one comment to make, if I may. On page 10, item 3.5, it says, in certain cases, the monitoring officer may refer particular complaints, blah, 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 where she feels that it would be inappropriate for her to take a decision on it. Could we make that, you know, them or they or whatever? Because otherwise we'd have to keep changing this if the monitoring officer changed. Right, so if there's no further questions or comments, could I have if everyone is happy with this, could I have a proposal that we adopt this procedure? Councillor Kinsey and Councillor Davis seconded. Yep. Are there any amendments to that? No? Are we all in favour? Right, thank you. That didn't take as long as I thought it might. Right, work programme complaints, which is on page 21 of our pack. Mrs. Fowkes, do you want to talk us through?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes. As members will be aware, we've just discussed 4.2 of this report mentions the proposed arrangements which members have just agreed. So as a result of that, I will now issue those new arrangements, make sure they're available on the Council's website, and then transact the changes to the name of the review subcommittee to the assessment subcommittee within the Council's constitution. At 4.3, I confirm that 2 recent code of conduct complaints were actually put through to the review subcommittee, and that subcommittee did meet and determined to uphold those initial assessment decisions. As members will be aware, we adopted a new code of conduct on the 10th of May, and again, hopefully, as the members will be aware, there is a brief training session on that code of conduct this evening, taking place virtually at 6 p.m. That session will be recorded, so if anybody is unable to attend, we will record that session and make it available to members afterwards. Happy to confirm that as of today's date, there are no new decisions from the local government ombudsman. I am aware of one complaint that is going through the assessment process with the local government ombudsman at the moment, so I'm anticipating that I may well have the decision on that to report to the next committee meeting in September. Similarly, we've had no complaints so far upheld at stage 2 of the Council's complaint process in the 22-23 year to date, so that's from the 1st of April of this year. Work continues on ensuring the Council is compliant with data protection requirements and anticipating that that should conclude shortly. Finally, members, at 4.14 of the report is the work programme for 22-23. So as members will be aware from that, at our next meeting on the 15th of September, which I've just noticed has got the wrong year on, apologies, due to have the report on the local government ombudsman, the normal work programme report, and then the elections manager, James O'Sullivan, is due to bring a report on progress towards the May 2023 elections, incorporating the changes necessary as a result of the recent local government boundary review. As ever, Chairman, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Foulkes. Are there any questions or comments at all for Mrs. Foulkes? No? Oh, certainly, Dr. Taylor.
Can't keep my mouth closed, I'm sorry. We reviewed the parish council, this code of conduct, and we adopted it at Brood. If it wasn't adopted, are all parish councils obliged to adopt this, and or what happens to any alternatives?
My understanding is that parish councils must have a code of conduct, but it does not have to be the standard code of conduct that's been agreed by district council, but you must have a code of conduct. Is that correct, Mrs. Foulkes?
Absolutely, Chairman, yes. So there's no legal requirement for parishes within our district to mirror our code of conduct. It obviously makes life easier for members and for complainants if it does. However, no, I have notified all parish clerks that the council has adopted the revised code of conduct and provided them with a copy of that, and I'm aware that at least one has decided to adopt it, but there's no legal requirement as long as they have a code of conduct.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments at this stage? No. In which case, I think we can close this meeting, and I look forward to seeing you on the 15th of September. So thank you very much for your attendance, and enjoy the rest of this very pleasant afternoon before the thunderstorms come on Saturday.